All right, welcome to the new and improved Not in Studios. After watching the news and seeing everyone doing it in front of a bookcase, I decided I had to move where I was doing this and uh, appear more professional because that is what you associate with AP Euro professionalism, of course. All right, today's big topic is going to be about chapters or section 7.3, 7.4 and 7.5 of the AP European history course description, and that is going to look at science and other cultural things like literature, philosophy, psychology, things like that. And the first person we have to talk about when it comes to 19th century science is the most important scientist, Charles Darwin. And of course, if you look at the title here, you can see that not only are we going to talk about Darwin's effect on scientific belief in European culture, but we are also going to look at how others take Darwin's ideas and use it for their own means, even if it's not biological in nature. So we're going to talk about social Darwinism, which is going to say many things about many different groups of people that we will get into. All right, so the big picture idea that you want to understand here is the effect that Darwin has on European ideas about science, as well as ideas about European culture and other cultures as well. All right, so you should have a basic understanding of Darwin's findings and ideas, which I feel I don't really need to go into in too much depth here. You should have had this in biology courses and things like that. But basically, Darwin is going to say that there is a scientific and material reason why biological changes take place. That basically nature is this great killing machine that efficiently and ruthlessly roots out species that are not best suited for survival, that species adapt over time, and those that have successful adaptations become more successful and they procreate and they continue on, and those that don't disappear, right? And so we call these ideas natural selection and survival of the fittest. Now, this is going to be controversial. And you probably should know about the religious beef that Darwin's ideas produce. Basically, Darwin is going to say that nature is the reason why various species have become the way that they are, including humanity, right? And so it's going to remove the need for God as a creator. And it is also going to challenge the idea that humans are God's special creation. Natural selection and Darwinian belief basically say human beings are the way they are because of evolutionary processes over time, and that there is no need for a divine creator. Nature is the great determiner of these things, and that humans are no different than any other animal species. They have undergone the same processes as anyone else. Obviously, you could see why this is going to promote a religious backlash to it. All right, so that's the ideas of Darwin. Now, we also have to talk about the social Darwinists. So Darwin is talking about human evolution over a long time, right? And he's also talking about humans as a species. But what social Darwinists are going to do is they are going to then take those ideas and apply them to specific groups of human beings. The social Darwinists that are mentioned here are going to create racialist theories, which basically are theories based on race. And so the most obvious example that we see of this is the new imperialism that takes place when European countries go and take over Africa and Asia in the mid-19th to the early 20th century. They will often justify it by using this coded racial sort of language that European civilization is the best, that Europeans have inherent racial qualities that allow them to achieve the highest levels of civilization, and Africans and Asians don't, and so therefore it is the Europeans' burden, duty, obligation, moral imperative, whatever you want to call it, to go and take these places over. We will also see social Darwinist ideas applied to other groups within European societies. There will be arguments against social welfare because the argument will be those who are poor because of inferior genetics that have been passed down over time, and that social welfare policies are only going to prop up these genetically weaker populations, and then they'll be allowed to procreate and spread their bad genes that lead to future poverty. Better to just let them sort of suffer now and be wiped out than do anything about them. Right, so these are changes made to Darwin's sorts of ideas. So that is really all we need to know about 7.4. It's pretty short. Let's move on to 7.5. 7.5 is titled The Age of Progress and Modernity, but really what it should be titled, if you ask me after reading it, should be The Cultural Changes of the Late 19th Century. And basically, the cultural changes can be summarized by this short phrase: we go from certainty and a belief in the objective truth of the world to uncertainty and a feeling of a loss of confidence in being able to really explain why things are the way that they are. So we go from certainty to uncertainty, if you want to make it even more simple than that. So let's look and see what the course description wants us to know here. Big picture idea: how has science developed and changed in the 1850 to 1914 time period? Now, the key thing here is that if you look at the first thing listed on this course description, it talks about positivism. Positivism is a continuity of Newtonian mechanical certainty of the world. So the key thing here is that scientific belief about midway through the 19th century stays the same. It is only in the late 19th century that we begin to see changes taking place to it that we will talk about in a second. So let's look at the continuity. So positivism was founded by a man named Auguste Comte, and he is basically thought of today as the first sociologist. And for those of you who don't know what sociology is, it is basically the idea that you can study human societies and experiment and draw conclusions and then create policies that will perfect society. And so basically you can see how this is a continuity of Newtonian mechanism. It is the idea that we can apply rational principles and experiments to human societies, we can draw conclusions, and we can create policies that lead to the perfection of society, right? And so the positivists are going to say that science alone is the main, or only, source of knowledge, and that human society should, when possible, and it should always be possible, to the largest extent possible, we should apply those rational scientific ideas to human affairs and human societies and create human society based on that rational sort of way. Okay? However, here we get into the change now. Soon, let's say the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, scientists begin to make new discoveries. And these discoveries are going to take us from the world of certitude to the world of uncertainty. And so let's look at the other areas outside of science that affects this first, because that's the order the course description goes in. Philosophy is going to move from one that was mostly based on rational ideas. The last time we talked about philosophy, we may not have phrased it this way, but it was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment philosophers were people who looked at human society and believed that by using rational laws, you could perfect society for the better. Well, what we are going to see is that those rational interpretations of human behavior are going to go away, or at least be challenged by new ideas. And these new philosophers of the late 19th century, like Friedrich Nietzsche, if you look over here under the illustrative examples, he's the first person listed. Nietzsche was a German philosopher who basically said all the old things that humans have created have lost their purpose, and we need to create a new way of living. And instead of basing it on rationality and science and whatever, he believed in emotion and impulse and violence and struggle, that all these things would make man strong and powerful and good, right? On our test that we took over this, I remember I added a quote from Nietzsche: "God is dead," right? That the idea of God was an idea from the past that no longer suited human societies moving into the future, right? And so Nietzsche is going to challenge all the old assumptions, and he is going to argue that we need a new society based on struggle and violence and emotion and things like that. He is going to be very influential on the development of futurists and fascism in Europe in the 20th century, but because of our current circumstances, we don't need to know that. There was another quote I remember Sophia put on her project about Nietzsche. It was something like, war and violence has gained more for mankind ever than love of neighbor. I can't quite remember what the quote was. I'm sure Sophia can email me it once she watches this video. This will be a way to see if she actually watches these videos. All right, Freud is going to emerge, and psychoanalysis is going to become his big area of expertise. And Freud is going to push the field of psychology into looking into the subconscious and focusing more on irrational and less scientific and rational explanations for human behavior. Basically, Freud, is going to argue that there are conscious things that shape human behavior, but there are also subconscious desires that we may not even be aware of that shape our personality and make us the way that we are. The id, the ego, and the superego is one of Freud's big ideas. This is the idea of the id being your internal desires that want immediate gratification and the pursuit of base pleasures for yourself. But they are contracted by the ego, which is the societal pressures that we all feel about what is proper behavior and decorum. And then the superego is sort of the traffic cop that tries to figure out what exactly we're going to do as a person, right? Like, what is our personality going to be? How much id, how much ego, those sorts of things. Freud was also famous for talking about the Oedipal complex, the idea that fathers and sons have this sort of the subconscious rivalry over, the sexual affections of the mother-wife, right? All kinds of crazy ideas like that. And then last but not least, scientific ideas are going to go into this uncertainty field, and they're really the main drivers of this cultural shift that we see. Scientists like Einstein and Heisenberg and Max Planck, if you want to look at the illustrative examples again, they are all going to come up with discoveries in quantum physics that are going to challenge that theoretical model of Newtonian rationality. And basically what they're going to say is like, hey man, like the theory of relativity by Einstein is that time and space are not constant, that they are dependent upon the observer to those phenomena. You're going to have Heisenberg's uncertainty theory, which basically states that subatomic particles cannot be 100% predicted where they will be, that it is just a best guess sort of thing. I am not going to talk about high-level physics anymore because it just makes me look dumb. We talk about this in class. I've already embarrassed myself. You guys can go and look at Google Slides, which I still have up on my website, sites.google.com/cfist.net/notanap. If you want to check those things out. That is all for today. We will continue in a second with looking at new imperialism, which I sort of talked about when we talk about social Darwinism, and then we will look at romanticism, and then that's it. Until then, talk to you later.